On this episode of our duck boat build, we're going to be putting in the framing for our front deck and the framing for our vertical walls. And then on this side, we're going to frame in our gun tray. First thing we have to do is support the side walls of the front deck and where all of our other framing is going to be. And we're going to do that with 1.5" angle. We're going to do this the exact same way that we did in the back. We're going to put some angle against the hull and kind of squeeze it down to make it fit. So that way we can tie in just like we did from the hatch lid over to the wall. We're going to do the same thing up here. So I'm going to start by taking one of my 6-foot sticks of angle. I'm going to go all the way up against the front of this original deck that's in here. I'm going to come back here, and I've got a little bit of an angle here, so I'm just going to eyeball this. I'm not worried about this being exactly flush, but that's about where I need to cut it right there. An old trusty bandsaw out and cut it. So now that I have this piece cut, I can hold it up against the wall and see. I think I'm going to be able to push this one without having to make any slots in it, so we should be good. Now I just got to squeeze this down a little bit here and a little bit more back here to get that angle right. Same way we did on the back. I'm gonna take my channel lock pliers and just kind of slowly bend this in just a little bit at a time. And we'll check our fit and see how we're doing. So it looks like we're good up here. I just need to come back to the back and bring that down just a little bit. I'll start about right here. And that looks good right there. To install these, we're going to be using our sealed in 3/16 rivets just like we did in the back. So I'm going to hold this up and try to get this as level as I can right here. And then I'm going to drill from the inside to the outside. Then I'll install our rivet from the outside of the boat to the inside. Now I'm going to hold this end up here, make sure this is nice and level. And I'm going to start somewhere back here in the middle and try to get that. Then we'll install this one from the outside as well. And I'm going to go ahead and put one in up here, just make sure that I'm still level, and throw in our rivet. Now I'm just going to go through here and fill in probably about every fist width or so, so about every 5 to 6 inches. Moving on down the side of the boat, we're going to do the same thing in between our 2 benches. So I'm going to start one back here at this bench, and I'll put a mark right here for the next bench. And we'll see how that fits. Pretty good. Now we are going to have to do a lot of bending on this. You can see this angle is a lot higher than what we actually need. We have to come down a pretty good bit. We're good up here, but we need just a little bit more back here in the back. And we'll install this the exact same way we did the front. Hold this up level. And we got the front and the back in. I'm just going to go down the side about every 5 to 6 inches and put in more. We're just going to do the exact same thing on the other side of the boat. The next thing we need to do is put in our header that's going to tie the 2 sides of the boat together. I've already cut this one down to size. It's about 41.5 inches on our particular boat, and this is going to go just underneath the rails right here. Figure out where you need to put this in. It's easier to start from the bottom, which is going to be where the upright support is going to tie in. So I'll move this out of the way for right now. For our vertical supports, we're going to be using 1.25" tube, and I want them to sit just on the outside of where this rib line is right here. So I'll have one here, and I'm going to have one over here. Now to attach this to the boat, we're going to need a piece of angle. And what we're going to do is put this piece of angle down on the floor. We're going to rivet it to our subfloor and our subfloor framing, and then this tube will attach with rivets right here. How I cut this is I took a square and I put the square just on the edge of the inside of this rib because that's where I wanted this to end. And then I just marked me a line and then I cut this down to size right here. On the other side, I did the exact same thing. I put my square in and lined it up with the inside of that rib. and I cut me a piece of angle that fits right there. And it goes all the way from the wall to where this mark is at. On this side, we're only going to the inside of our vertical wall, so that's why this one's a lot shorter. Then I took another piece of 1.25" tube and cut it down to height and set it right there. Now, as you can see, these are at a little bit of an angle because our floor is curved. That's not a big deal. If you want to mount these to where they're straight, you can adjust these up and rivet them in straight. We're gonna go with that little bit of angle. It looks cool and it's not really gonna hurt anything at all. Now, we had to cut this beforehand and we did it off camera and I did not film it, but what we did was just kind of work these in a little bit at a time until we got it all to fit the way that we wanted it to. That's how the construction of all this is going to go, but we're going to start by removing all the stuff out of our way except for our 2 bottom angle pieces. I'm just going to hold these in place and go ahead and throw a couple of rivets in it. We're going to be using regular standard dome head rivets to attach these. And when you're installing these rivets, you have to keep in mind that your vertical support is going to be right here. So you don't want to put a rivet all the way out to the edge, and you don't want to put a rivet right here where the vertical support is going to be hitting it. What I'm doing is putting it right here in the center so that when I put the vertical support on, it will go over that rivet. This is how it will fit once it is in place. To install our upright support, I'm just going to line this up and hold it in place. I'm going to drill a hole right through the front, but you got to remember, I'm going to be putting 2 rivets in here, so I'm going to kind of offset them just a little bit. I'm going to throw one more in, and I'm going to try to go just off to the side and a little bit lower than that first one. And the reason that I'm countersinking these is because I want this to have a flat face on it, because we may end up paneling this with a sheet of aluminum. And if you have a regular rivet in there, when you go to put the sheet over the top, you'll have that little head keeping it from going all the way flush. All right, I'll do the same thing on the other side. Now that we have our 2 uprights in place, I can go ahead and get this mocked up about where I want it to be. The easiest thing to do would be to rivet this upright support into this angle, and then we can kind of figure out where exactly this is going to be straight at. Because as you can see, I can move this around a little bit and kind of put this wherever I want it to be. So what I'll do is I'll start out with just putting a couple of rivets in these upright supports, and then we'll make some final adjustments. This is also your last opportunity to make sure that all this stuff is square. So if you need to move these around a little bit, now's the time to do it. All right, now that I've got this in here, I can kind of take a clamp and just hold this side in place. And it looks like I'm going to need to come in on that side just a hair. So what we've decided is we're going to use our big square and pull this cross beam up to the square. Now, that is going to give us a little bit of an angle on this front. That's totally okay. I think it's actually going to look pretty cool. So what I've done is just use a clamp and put it in place, and I'm going to put a mark where the front of this is supposed to mount. And we're going to do the exact same thing on the other side. And we're not riveting that in just yet. We've got something else that we need to tackle before we put that in. This might be a little difficult to understand, but just follow along. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be putting a piece of angle all the way down the side of the boat, just like this. And when we go to make our shelf for the gun tray, we're going to put another piece of angle in just like this. That is going to be what our shelf is going to attach to. It'll give us a nice little recessed area for that tray. The problem that we're running into is because we have nothing supporting the side to side of the boat, you can see there's a big gap between where this piece of angle is and the side of the boat. And what we need to do is rivet this in so that it actually squeezes up to the side of the boat and forms that curvature right here. If we don't do this now and we rivet that in, that will keep that crossbar is going to keep us from squeezing the sides of the boat in. So the first thing we're going to do before we do anything is we're going to go ahead and get this piece in. And it's probably going to take 2 of us and probably going to need some kind of clamp to do this with. We're going to start with our very first rivet down here in the corner. We're going to be using countersinks for these. And we're just going to put a clamp on the side of the boat and pull this in as tight as we can get it. And now you can see how that curved down the side of the boat right there. We would not have been able to do that very well if that front piece was attached already. All right, now I can go ahead and attach this side. And I'll put one in on this side. Then I'll just go ahead and put a couple more rivets on each one. Now we just need to fill in this last little spot right here on the side where our gun tray is going to be. So I'll line this up on the front edge. And this is probably going to be angled just slightly. That fits pretty well right there. There it is. All right, so Ryan's going to pull this bottom piece out so that it's touching the inside edge of this angle that's going straight down. With our long 6-foot piece in, I've now taken a piece of scrap and cut it down to size. I only need it to go to the edge of where we cut the bench right here. So I can go ahead and slide that back behind our first piece of angle right here. That leveled out so that these are nice and flush right there. And we'll just go ahead and install some countersink rivets in the front. The next step is to build our cross member that's going to go from underneath this back bench all the way up here to the front deck. Now, this part can be a little bit complicated, so I'm going to show you a mock-up of it first, and then I'm going to show you how I go about the process of actually building this. We're trying to keep this as simple as possible, but this is probably one of the more complicated parts of this build, so pay attention. What we're trying to replicate is this shelf that we've built right here. It's almost like a dry track and a lid, and it's going to take 3 pieces of angled aluminum in order to form this. This first piece is going to be level with that outside wall. The next piece is going to go underneath it just like this to form a channel. And then our upright support is going to slide inside this channel and it's going to mount to the outside right here. Bottom will mount to this angle that we put in with the subfloor. Now to make this a shelf, we're going to take one more piece of aluminum and we're going to come in here from the bottom just like this. Once this is assembled, it will be running all the way to the front of the boat where the deck starts and all the way back up underneath that bench. And that's going to provide us some support for the sheeting that's going to cover up this hole. And this is what's going to form our gun tray. That way that anything you put in here won't roll out into your floor and won't roll out on the side of the boat. Now, when we build this, we're going to have some long 6-foot pieces and we're going to have some short pieces that are only a foot or 2. So we're going to have some places where 2 pieces of angle are meeting on the outside and on the inside. And to strengthen all of this, we're going to have to really be careful to make sure that we're using long pieces in between when we make our channel to support those butt joints on each side. And we'll have to do the same thing when we install that shelf on the inside. We want it to be on a solid part right here and not on a butt joint like we have right here. First thing we're going to need to do is figure out where this vertical wall hits this top bench right here. And to do that, I've just taken a long 12-inch square, holding it flat on the floor. And that gives me my mark right there that I need to know where this wall will come up and be nice and square. We're going to do the same thing up here on the front where the wall meets the deck. I put it flat on the floor and I made me a mark right here on this front deck cross member so I know where this wall needs to end. We're going to start with our outside piece, which is going to fit in just like this. We're going to start back here on the back bench and slide this piece all the way up against that back wall. I'm going underneath the bench, not on top. And I'm just going to take a little clamp and I'm going to hold that in place. Then I'm going to take one of my scrap pieces. I'm going to put it underneath this and run it all the way over to this mark that I made on the front bench. I'm going to put a clamp on there as well to hold that. Now, holding that mark that I made on the front bench, I'm going to come in here with another clamp and hold that in place. So now this thing is somewhat supported on its own. If you have a friend or buddy that can help you do this, it will probably make it a lot easier. I'm showing you how to do it by yourself if you just happen to not have anybody close by when you get to this step in the project. So those little spring clamps, you can pick those up at Home Depot, Lowe's, Harbor Freight. They're real cheap and they come in handy when you're doing a project like this. The next thing we need to do is cut one vertical support, and we're going to do that out of our 1 1/4 tube. You're going to take your measurement from the inside of this vertical wall up to the top of this cross member that we're building right here. The measurement on this is going to be different for every boat, but I went ahead and cut mine to size. I'm just going to set it in there. That's going to offer this some support and make sure this is nice and level. All right, with all that in place, I'm going to take one more clamp and I'm going to clamp the vertical upright to this crossbar right here. With that supported, I'm going to undo this clamp and I'm going to undo this clamp so I can take this piece out. With this piece out, I can now figure out how much overlap I'm going to need and make a cut over here where this is going to overlap onto this front deck piece. Now, this may take a little trial and error because it's going to be really hard to fit this in. So what I'm doing is I'm just holding this up kind of high on this edge right here, and I'm going to put a mark on the front face of this, because what I'm going to be doing is actually cutting a notch out of here. I can come back here and make my second mark for where I need to make this notch at. I'll start by cutting it at this far end mark over here, and that'll get me down to size, and then I'll use the bandsaw to cut this notch out. You can also do this with an angle grinder or a jigsaw if you want to. Give this a test fit, make sure we got a nice tight fit in here. I know this might sound a little crazy, but we're going to take all this apart and we're going to build this before we do the actual install into the boat. So this is that 6-foot piece that came out of my little jig that I made. I'm going to take my second piece. This is going to be where we start the channel at. I'm going to stack these on top of each other to start forming our channel. And I'm going to make sure that the ends of these are lined up nice and tight, just like that. This might be a little difficult to clamp, but I'm going to try to clamp this in place as best I can. I'll lay this down on the floor and go ahead and put me a rivet right up here somewhere. One rivet holding it in place. I'm going to mock this up one more time, and I'm just going to double check and make sure there's no upright supports right here where I need to put the second rivet. And my next upright support is here. My piece ends right here, so I'm good to go ahead and put one in down here. So that's going to start our channel. Now I can come back in with that first piece of 6-foot angle that I had. I'm going to line these up, and I'm just going to double check this one more time as I go to make sure this all fits. I don't really have a great way to do this and show you guys what I'm doing, but I'm going to go ahead and put one rivet in here. All right, with that one installed, I can go ahead and mock this all back up. Use a little clamp back here just to hold this in place temporarily. And I can go back here and figure out where all of my upright supports are going to be so I don't put rivets in the wrong place. With those marked up, I can go ahead and install another rivet down here to hold this piece. Now I just need to fill in this last little portion back here. And it looks like I got a piece of scrap from when we cut the cross supports on the subfloor. That's going to be just long enough. So I'll go ahead and make me a mark up here, and I'll get that cut on the miter saw. And with that last piece cut down to size, I can go ahead and rivet it into place. So now that we have the channel portion built, we need to go ahead and install the lip. I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this, but here's where our break was on the inside of that channel. I want to make sure that this next 6-foot piece is going to split the difference between those two, so that way I can support it on both sides. And then when I put the next piece in over here, it's going to be supported on both sides of this long 6-foot piece. So we're doing the opposite every single time that we put another piece of angle. That way, everywhere you have a break, you have a support. There is honestly no easy way to do this, so I'm just going to kind of clamp this in place real quick. I'm going to come down here with another clamp. And hopefully that will hold it enough so that I can get a couple of rivets in here. Now, same thing, I have to pay attention to where my upright supports are going to go, where I put those marks at. I don't want to put any rivets in right there. So I'll start down here at the end and work my way down. With that 6-foot piece installed, I can now take another one of our scraps, hold it up over here on this end, get it all nice and lined up, and I will have to trim this just a little bit, and I'll go cut this on the miter saw. And with that piece cut, I'm going to go ahead and try to clamp this in place as best I can. It's going to be really difficult to hold this and try to install it at the same time. All right, I hope you can see this, but that is what we made. We made a long channel shelf thing that's going to stretch all the way from the front to the back. And once we get this thing vertically supported, you'll actually be able to step on this without any issues. With all of our rivets in our big framing piece that we made here, I went ahead and lined this up with my mark in the back, put a clamp on it, and I did the same thing up front. I'm going to go ahead and shoot a few rivets into this just to hold it in place so that we can start framing up the vertical wall. Now, the framing for the vertical walls is super simple. We're going to take our 1¼ inch tube, and we're just going to go through and measure this and get these in. And I'm putting this right in the center of each one of those ribs that we made. Once I get them in place, I'm just going to come in here with a square and make sure that these are nice and straight. One thing that will help you in this process is a long level like this, or some type of straight edge that you can run across the length of this framing piece, and make sure that you're not cutting your vertical supports too high. You want these framing pieces to sit flush against the top and down on that rib to give you the maximum support. And if it's too low, you'll notice that it'll sag here in the middle, and you'll actually be able to see daylight down underneath. It's kind of hard to measure these with a tape measure. I used a tape measure just to get me started. I cut them a little long, and then I just went back on the miter saw and just cut these down to size. And it did take a little bit of fine tuning, just cutting a little bit at a time, sometimes a blade width, sometimes half a blade width, till I got all of these perfect. I come in here with my spring clamp. Put a spring clamp around the bottom just to hold that in place. And I'm going to do the same thing up here. And then we'll start installing our rivets. So I'm just going to install 2 rivets now just to get me started, and then I'm going to come back in and put a second rivet kind of offset on each one of these once I have them all in place. Now on this upright support, I'm putting this right in the middle of where these 2 angle pieces are. That way I can get a rivet in on each side, and that'll help tie these 2 pieces of angle to this upright wall. Now that I got the top and bottom in, I can come in and put another rivet on this side right here. In this little space right here, I've got this section that we had to put that notch in. I'm going to be putting 2 upright supports on this particular side. That way I can make sure that I've got support on both sides of that notch, and that notch won't want to flex once we get the wall installed. Now I can take my second piece and put it in there right next to the first one. Very tight fit. We'll do one last check before we put our final rivets in, and looks like we're good. So I'm just going to go back through and put one more rivet on each side. I'm going to kind of offset them. So like I had a rivet here, and the next one I'm going to put in right up here. Same thing down here. I did this one up kind of high. I'm going to put this one down just a little bit lower. The last thing we need to do is add some support from side to side on our tray. And we're going to do that with just our scrap pieces of angle. I've already cut them down to size. What we're going to do is mount them underneath those 2 lips right here and rivet it in from the top. What that's going to do is help support that sheeting that we're going to put down in here, just in case anybody were to step on this. There won't be any flex in this wall from side to side. Now my goal is to try to get one in between each one of these vertical supports. But what's really important to remember is the longest sheet size that we have for this tray is 60 inches. So what I want to do is I want to start here in the back. Measure out 60 inches. I'm going to put a mark right here. That mark is going to let me know where I need to put 2 pieces of angle back to back. And what I'll do is I'll rivet those together. I will have a place to rivet the back sheet, and then this front little sheet right here will have a place to rivet as well. It's easier to do when you have 2 pieces of angle to rivet to, instead of trying to split the difference between the 2, because that only leaves you about 3/4 inch on each side to get a rivet in. And we've got a bunch of scrap anyway, so we'll go ahead and rivet those 2 together. The next thing we need to do is tie in our 2 front pieces, and we're going to do that with a little small piece of angle. Every boat's going to be different, so I can't tell you the exact measurement on mine. It was about 4.5 inches. I'm going to install this just like this, back behind here and underneath here. So it's going to slide in just like that. This is probably going to be a little bit difficult to see because I'm probably going to be covering some of this up. I'm going to go ahead and throw me a rivet in right here. And we'll countersink that. And because this is still angled just slightly, what I want to do is pull up on this piece right here so I can get it nice and flat right there. I'll throw our rivet in, and I just got to make sure that I push up on that piece on the bottom, make it all nice and tight. And I'm going to come back with another scrap piece, hold that in place, make me a mark right on the inside of this. And I'm going to cut that to slide down in that little slot right there. And you can see this doesn't want to sit flush because the edge is overlapping right there. So I'm just going to hit that with an angle grinder real quick. Now that fits in there nice, and that caps off that end. We're not going to install it yet. We're going to wait until we actually put our sheeting in here, and then we'll put this over the top to kind of cap it off. Back here in the back, I'm going to do something similar, and I've been hanging on to all my scrap angle aluminum pieces, and one of these is going to fit just perfect right there. I'm going to need one piece to go in from the top here to form that back wall, and then I'm going to need another piece to go down in here so that we have something to rivet the backside of the sheeting to once we get the tray part of the sheeting in. I got one piece of scrap that fits perfect right there. This one I'm going to have to trim. So that fits nicely right there. All we need to do is take that out, put this bottom piece in first. Just get it kind of held in place. My microphone decided to exit stage left about right here. All I'm doing is the exact same procedure that I did on the front. The only thing different is you're going to be mounting this to that bench piece that we cut off, and you're going to put some rivets in that first, and then go back in and add that second piece. Just like we did on the front, I'm not going to install that outer trim piece. The reason I'm leaving it in is because I want to put the 090 sheeting in for the shelf first, or that little tray first, and then we'll put that cover piece on. It's going to act like a trim piece and make it look nice and square when we go to paint this. It'll look really good. So the gun tray turned out really cool. I know it may have been a little bit difficult to follow, but now that you've seen it, it's probably going to be a lot easier to replicate than it is for me to just explain it the first time and you go build it. We've got the start of our front deck in place, and we got more than half of our vertical walls framed up, so we are looking good. In the next video, we're going to be going over the gun box lid and how to frame all of that in, and then we'll be working on getting the front deck storage area done. Stick around because you are not going to want to miss the completion of our 1436 John boat to duck boat conversion.